Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this one ends. Have you ever wondered how far you'd go for justice? What would you do if the person you sacrificed everything for suddenly decided you were worthless? Would you walk away gracefully, or would you fight back with every ounce of strength you had left? And what if fighting back meant crossing a line you could never, ever uncross? What if it meant doing something so dark, so irreversible, that you'd carry it with you for the rest of your life? Today's story is about betrayal, greed, and revenge. It's about what happens when a good woman is pushed too far. It's about ancient magic, deadly consequences, and a curse that consumed everything in its path. So settle in, turn off the lights if you dare, and let me tell you about the worst, and last, mistake my husband ever made. My name is Helen. I'm 47 years old, and I have 3 grown children, 2 sons and a daughter. They've all built their own lives now, gotten married, started families of their own, and settled in the city to chase their dreams. I'm proud of them. They worked hard for everything they have. And I worked hard to give them that chance. I've worked my entire life. From the moment I could walk, I was helping my parents on their farm. When I married my husband Richard 30 years ago, his father gave us a small farm as a wedding gift. 20 acres of decent land on the edge of town. Work the land, the old man told us with that stern look of his. Plant your crops, reap your harvest, and make your own way in this world. Don't come crying to me for handouts. Richard's father was a strange man. He was wealthy, very wealthy, but he was the kind of person who'd let his money rot in a bank account before spending a single dime on anyone, even his own children. He lived in a big house on the hill, alone and miserable, counting his money like a dragon guarding gold. He never threw parties, never took vacations, never enjoyed a single thing his wealth could have bought him. He was, in every sense of the word, a miser. Richard, my husband, was his complete opposite. Where his father hoarded every penny, Richard spent every dollar that came his way. He was lazy, irresponsible, and completely allergic to hard work. If there was an easy way out, Richard would find it. If there was a shortcut, he'd take it. And if there was someone else who could do the work for him, well, that's what he'd prefer most of all. For 30 long years, I worked that farm alone. Every spring, I'd plow the fields. Every summer, I'd tend the crops under the blazing sun, my hands blistered and aching. Every fall, I'd bring in the harvest, working from sunrise to sunset. Every winter, I'd prepare for the next season, repairing equipment, planning what to plant. Richard? He'd sit in the shade with a cigarette, watching me work. Sometimes he'd go to the bar and drink away whatever little money we had. He never planted a single seed. Never pulled a single weed. Never lifted a finger to help. I hid the money I made from the farm, penny by penny, in an old jewelry box I kept buried in my closet. Richard would have drunk it away or gambled it at the poker table if he'd known about it. With that hidden money, I put my kids through college. I bought their textbooks, paid their tuition, made sure they had everything they needed to succeed. I gave them a future. I gave them a chance to escape the life I'd been trapped in. And thank God, they all made it. My oldest son became an engineer. My daughter became a teacher. My youngest son works in IT. They're good people with good jobs, and I'm so proud of them. When the kids finally moved out and started their own lives, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could finally rest. I thought I could enjoy what little peace I had left. Richard spent most nights at the bar anyway, stumbling home at dawn reeking of whiskey and cigarettes. I didn't mind anymore. Honestly, I preferred it when he wasn't around. The house was quieter. Calmer. I could breathe. I rented out the farmland to a young family who actually wanted to work it, and I lived quietly on that rental income. I had my little vegetable garden behind the house, and that became my sanctuary. My tomatoes, my peppers, my herbs, they didn't judge me. They didn't ask for anything except water and sunlight. That garden was the only thing that made me happy anymore. I thought maybe, finally, after decades of struggle and sacrifice, I could have a little peace. But the peace I thought I'd earned, it was about to shatter into a nightmare I never saw coming. A nightmare that would consume my husband, test my soul, and change me into someone I barely recognized. Everything changed the day Richard's father died. Richard's mother had passed away a few years earlier from pneumonia, and after she was gone, the old man retreated completely into himself. He became a ghost in his own home, bedridden and bitter. He stopped answering phone calls. He stopped going to church. He fired his housekeeper and lived alone in that big, creaky house on the hill, surrounded by his money and his misery. He never remarried, never called his children to his side, never asked for help even when he desperately needed it. When he finally died, alone in his bed, the news spread through town like wildfire. And suddenly, none of his neglect mattered. Suddenly, Richard and his 3 siblings, who hadn't visited their father in years, who hadn't called him on holidays or birthdays, who'd left him to rot in that house, showed up at the funeral acting like devoted, heartbroken children. The funeral was packed. The house was filled with relatives I'd never even met, all dressed in black, all wearing sad faces. People hugged each other and said things like, "He was such a good man," and "He'll be so missed." But I saw through it. I saw the way people kept glancing at each other, calculating, wondering. Everyone was already counting their share of the inheritance. Richard stood by the casket with his head bowed, playing the grieving son. But I knew him too well. Behind those fake tears, his mind was racing. He was already spending his father's money in his head. Before the funeral was even over, before the man was even cold in the ground, the vultures started circling. Richard's siblings started whispering in corners, pulling out documents, making phone calls to lawyers. The will was read 3 days later in the old man's study, and that's when everything exploded. Turns out, Richard's father was far wealthier than anyone had imagined. He didn't just have money in the bank, he had assets everywhere. Farmland across 3 counties. Rental properties in town. Commercial buildings on Main Street. Investment accounts, bonds, stocks. The man had been sitting on a fortune worth millions, and he'd lived like a pauper his entire life. The siblings went to war immediately. Richard and his 2 brothers and 1 sister fought like rabid dogs over every single acre, every single property, every single dollar. There were screaming matches in the lawyer's office. Threats. Accusations. Someone hired a private investigator to prove someone else had manipulated the old man before he died. Another sibling tried to claim the will was forged. The fighting went on for weeks. Lawyers sent letters. Court dates were scheduled. Family members stopped speaking to each other. Richard would come home every night red-faced and furious, ranting about how his sister was trying to cheat him, how his brothers were lying about what their father promised them. But eventually, after all the fighting and legal battles, they divided it all up. The court forced them to split everything 4 ways, and Richard walked away with a fortune. Farmland, rental properties, and over $500,000 in cash and investments. I'll admit, when I first heard how much he'd inherited, I felt a genuine spark of hope. Our kids had been struggling in the city for years. My oldest son and his wife were drowning in rent, living in a cramped 1-bedroom apartment with 2 kids. My daughter was working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. My youngest son had student loans that would take him 20 years to pay off. I thought maybe, just maybe, Richard would finally step up and be a father. Maybe he'd help them. Buy them each a house, or at least a down payment. Give them some security, some breathing room. They were his children, after all. His flesh and blood. So one night, I worked up the courage to bring it up. Richard was sitting in his recliner, counting a stack of cash he'd just withdrawn from the bank. He kept running his thumb over the bills, smiling to himself. "Richard," I said carefully, "now that you have all this money, have you thought about helping the kids?" He didn't even look up. "What about them? They're struggling. You know that. Maybe you could buy them each a house. Or help with their loans. They're your children. They've worked so hard, and they. What did my father ever do for me?" Richard snapped, finally looking up at me with cold eyes. "He gave me 20 acres and told me to figure it out. The kids can work for it just like I did. They'll be fine." I stared at him, stunned into silence. Like he did? This man had never worked a day in his life. I was the one who worked that farm. I was the one who turned the soil, planted the seeds, harvested the crops. I was the one who kept us fed, who kept the bills paid. And now he was sitting there, talking like he'd built an empire with his own 2 hands. "Richard," I said, my voice shaking, "you didn't work for anything." "I did. I worked that farm for 30 years while you sat around drinking. You never lifted a finger." His face darkened. "Get out of my sight, Helen. I don't want to hear your nagging." I left the room before I said something I'd regret. The kids called constantly after that, hoping their father would help them. But Richard ignored their calls. When he did answer, he'd tell them he was thinking about it, or needed more time. But I knew the truth. He had no intention of helping them. Not now. Not ever. One by one, my children gave up. One by one, they stopped calling. Some of them stopped speaking to their father altogether. I kept trying to reason with Richard. I begged him. I pleaded. "Richard, they're your children. You can afford it now. Don't you have any conscience left? Any sense of decency?" But the man I'd married was gone. In his place was a stranger. A cruel, selfish stranger who cared about no one but himself. And then Richard didn't just become selfish, he became someone I didn't even recognize. The man who used to sleep until noon and go days without showering was suddenly up at dawn, dressed in expensive clothes, driving a brand new luxury car. He bought a silver BMW, sleek, shiny, and completely ridiculous for a 60-year-old man who'd never cared about cars before. He wore cologne. He got his hair styled at an expensive salon in the city. He bought tailored suits, designer sunglasses, Italian leather shoes. He strutted around town like he was a celebrity, like he was someone important. People stared. People whispered. But Richard loved the attention. And then, one day, he disappeared. He didn't tell me where he was going. He just packed a bag and left. His phone went straight to voicemail. Days passed with no word. I called his siblings, they hadn't heard from him. I called his friends at the bar, they hadn't seen him. For an entire week, I didn't hear a single word from him. His phone stayed off. I called hospitals, police stations, even the morgue. Nothing. No accidents. No arrests. No sign of him anywhere. I paced the house every night, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. What if he'd had a heart attack? What if someone had robbed him, killed him for his money? What if he was lying dead in a ditch somewhere? I barely slept. I barely ate. I just waited. Then, exactly 1 week later, the door opened at 2 a.m. Richard walked in like nothing had happened. He was wearing a brand new suit, navy blue, perfectly tailored. A gold Rolex glittered on his wrist. His hair was freshly cut and slicked back. He reeked of expensive cologne, the kind that probably cost more than our monthly grocery bill. I was sitting in the kitchen, exhausted and furious. "Richard, where the hell have you been?" I demanded, standing up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "I thought you were dead." "I've been calling hospitals, calling the police." He smiled. It was a cold, smug smile that made my blood run cold. "Relax, Helen. I was in the city. For a week. Without telling me. Without answering your phone." He shrugged, setting his keys on the counter. "I needed some space. Some time to think." "Think about what?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Contempt. Pure, icy contempt. "Helen," he said slowly, like he was talking to a child, "I appreciate everything you've done over the years. You kept the house clean. You raised the kids. You worked the farm. I'm grateful for that. But this town, this life, this house, you're not enough for me anymore." I felt like he'd punched me in the stomach. What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm starting over," he said simply. "I've got money now. I've got options. And I've met someone. Someone who actually appreciates me." The room spun. You met someone?" "Her name's Sarah. She's 35, smart, beautiful. She lives in the city. We've been seeing each other for a few months now." "Months?" He nodded, completely unbothered by my shock. "I'm going to marry her, Helen. I'm going to start a new life. You can keep this house and the farm. Consider it payment for all those years of service." "Payment?" He said it like I was a housekeeper. Like I was hired help. Something inside me snapped. "Payment?" I screamed, my voice breaking. "Are you out of your mind? I built this house. That farm was a wedding gift to me. I'm the one who worked it. I'm the one who kept us alive all these years while you sat around doing nothing. And now you're acting like you're doing me some kind of favor." His face twisted with arrogance. "You don't understand, Helen. Women in the city, real women, they see what I'm worth. They appreciate me. You." He looked me up and down with disgust. "You're just a worker. A maid. You've got dirt under your fingernails and calluses on your hands. You wouldn't understand what it's like to be with someone who actually values me." I lunged at him. I didn't even think, I just moved. I screamed and swung at him, my fists hitting his chest. "You're 60 years old." I shrieked. "You have grandchildren. Have you completely lost your mind?" That's when he hit me. His open palm cracked across my face so hard I heard ringing in my ears. The force of it knocked me sideways. I stumbled, my vision blurring, and collapsed onto the kitchen floor. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just lay there, my cheek throbbing, tasting blood in my mouth. Richard stood over me, breathing hard. He looked down at me with cold eyes, like I was garbage on the sidewalk. Then he grabbed his keys and walked out. The door slammed behind him. I stayed on that floor for a long time, crying, shaking, unable to move. That was the first time in 30 years of marriage that Richard had ever hit me. And somehow, that hurt more than anything he'd said. Days passed. Then a week. Richard didn't come back. He didn't call. His phone stayed off. I tried to pull myself together. I tried to convince myself that maybe he'd come to his senses, that maybe this was just some midlife crisis and he'd snap out of it. But then I heard the rumor. I was at the general store buying groceries when I overheard two women talking by the checkout counter. Did you hear? Richard's selling that farm of his. My blood went cold. The one his wife works, the other woman asked. Yeah. Apparently, he's got a realtor and everything. Planning to sell it and move to the city full-time. I dropped my basket right there in the aisle and ran. I drove straight to the town clerk's office, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. When I got there, I demanded to see the property records. And there it was. The farm, my farm, the one I'd worked for 30 years, was listed for sale. Richard had put it on the market without telling me. Without asking me. Without any regard for the fact that it was my livelihood, my income, my life. There must be some mistake, I said to the clerk, my voice breaking. That farm was a wedding gift. It's mine. The clerk looked at me with pity. I'm sorry, ma'am, but according to our records, the deed is in Richard's name. Legally, he has every right to sell it. I felt the world tilt. Because she was right. When Richard's father gave us the farm, he put it in Richard's name. I'd never thought to question it. Why would I? We were married. We were supposed to be partners. But now I had nothing. No legal claim. No rights. Nothing. I stumbled out of the clerk's office in a daze. I sat in my car and stared at nothing, my mind completely blank. Then I drove to the mayor's house. Mayor Thompson had been friends with Richard since they were kids. They drank at the same bar, played poker together. If anyone knew what Richard was really up to, it was him. The mayor's wife, Diane, answered the door. She took one look at me and pulled me inside. Helen, honey, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I need to talk to your husband, I said, my voice hollow. Please. She called him in from the backyard, where he'd been grilling. Mayor Thompson came in wiping his hands on a dish towel, his face full of concern. Helen. What's going on? Richard's selling my farm, I said. And I heard he's with someone. Another woman. The mayor's face fell. He glanced at his wife, then back at me. Helen, sit down. Just tell me the truth, I said. Please. He sighed heavily. Yeah. It's true. Richard's been seeing a woman in the city. Her name's Sarah. He's been flashing money around, bought her an apartment, bought her a car. He's been telling people he's going to divorce you and marry her. The words hit me like bullets. He told me himself, the mayor continued, that he's done with this town. Done with, well, done with his old life. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was beyond tears. I just sat there, numb. Diane put her hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Helen. I went home and told my children everything. They were devastated. Furious. Heartbroken. My oldest son punched a hole in his apartment wall. My daughter cried for hours. My youngest son wanted to drive down and confront his father, but I begged him not to. There's nothing you can do, I told him. He's made up his mind. But the truth was, I didn't believe that. Not yet. For days, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the walls of the house I'd built, the life I'd sacrificed everything for. I kept thinking there had to be a way. There had to be something I could do. Some way to fight back. And that's when I remembered her. A woman from my past. A woman people whispered about but never spoke of openly. A woman who could help me, if I was willing to pay the price. I grew up in a tiny, dying town called Blackwood Hollow, about 2 hours north of here. Most people had moved away years ago, leaving behind empty houses and overgrown streets. But there was one woman who still lived there. A woman who'd been there as long as anyone could remember. Old Mary. She was the town midwife, the healer, the woman people went to when doctors couldn't help. She delivered babies, set broken bones, made herbal remedies for colds and fevers. But behind closed doors, people said she did other things. Dark things. Things you didn't talk about in daylight. They said she could curse your enemies. They said she could see the future. They said she made deals with forces that shouldn't be named. When I was a little girl, my mother warned me to stay away from old Mary's house. That woman isn't right, she'd said. She's dangerous. But now, desperate and out of options, I couldn't think of anyone else who could help me. I hadn't been back to Blackwood Hollow in over 20 years. I didn't even know if old Mary was still alive. But I had to try. I convinced Diane, the mayor's wife, to drive me there. I told her I wanted to visit my parents' graves, which was partly true. But I didn't tell her the real reason I was going. The drive took 2 hours. Diane chatted the whole way, trying to keep my spirits up, but I barely heard her. My mind was racing. When we finally arrived in Blackwood Hollow, I felt like I'd stepped into a graveyard. The town was practically deserted. Half the houses were boarded up. Weeds grew through cracks in the sidewalks. The old church had collapsed in on itself. It was a ghost town in every sense of the word. But old Mary's house stood exactly as I remembered it. Stone walls. Crooked shutters. A garden full of wild herbs and strange plants I didn't recognize. The smell of rosemary and sage hung heavy in the air. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. "Come in," a voice called from inside. Diane hesitated on the porch. "Helen, who is this woman?" I turned to her, my face serious. "Listen to me very carefully. Don't ask questions. And don't tell anyone, not even your husband, what you see or hear in this house. Do you understand? Swear it." Her face went pale, but she nodded. "I swear." I pushed the door open. The inside of the house was dim, lit only by a few candles and the gray light coming through dirty windows. The air smelled like old wood, dried herbs, and something else, something faintly metallic and sharp. Old Mary sat in a worn armchair in the center of the room, wrapped in a dark shawl. Her eyes were sharp and clear, like broken glass catching the light. And she looked exactly the same as she had 20 years ago. Not a new wrinkle. Not a single gray hair out of place. She should have been ancient by now, over 90, at least, but she looked maybe 60. It was impossible. Unnatural. She smiled faintly when she saw me. "Helen," she said, her voice like dry leaves scraping stone. "I wondered when you'd come." My throat went dry. You remember me?" "I remember everyone who comes to my door," she said. "Sit." Diane and I sat on a sagging couch across from her. Diane looked terrified. "So," old Mary said, leaning forward, "what brings you here after all these years?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. The inheritance. Richard's betrayal. The other woman. The farm he was selling. My children's suffering. Every humiliating, painful detail. When I finished, old Mary sat back and studied me for a long moment. "So what do you want from me?" "Justice," I said, my voice shaking. "I want him to pay for what he's done. I want him to suffer the way he's made us suffer." She nodded slowly. "And you understand what you're asking for?" "Yes. This isn't something I do for you," she said. "This is something you do. I'll give you the tools. I'll show you the way." But you have to walk it yourself. You have to be the one to curse him. Can you handle that? I hesitated. For just a moment, doubt flickered through me. Then I thought about Richard's face when he hit me. I thought about my children crying on the phone. I thought about 30 years of sacrifice being thrown away like garbage. Yes, I said firmly. I can handle it. Old Mary studied me for another moment, then nodded. She stood and disappeared into a back room. Diane grabbed my arm. "Helen, what are you doing?" she whispered frantically. "What I have to," I said. Old Mary returned carrying a large bundle wrapped in black cloth. She set it on the table in front of me. "Everything you need is in here," she said. "Herbs, roots, instructions. Follow them exactly. Don't skip a single step. If you do this halfway, it won't work. And if you're too scared to see it through." She picked up the bundle and held it out to me. "Then take your jewelry and leave. I don't work with cowards." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my grandmother's gold bracelet, the only valuable thing I owned. I set it on the table. "I'm not a coward," I said. Old Mary took the bracelet and tucked it into her shawl. Then she handed me the bundle. "Then get out of my house," she said. "And don't come back." Diane and I stumbled out of Old Mary's house in stunned silence. On the drive home, Diane kept glancing at me like I was a stranger. "Helen," she finally said, her voice shaking, "what was that? Who is that woman? You swore you wouldn't tell anyone," I reminded her. "I won't, but..." "Then don't ask." She didn't say another word. When we got back to town, I thanked Diane and went straight home. I locked the doors, closed all the curtains, and sat at the kitchen table with the bundle in front of me. My hands shook as I untied the black cloth. Inside were things I didn't recognize: dried herbs tied with twine, gnarled roots that looked almost human, a black crow's feather, a small jar of something dark and sticky, thorny seeds, and a tangle of spiderweb wrapped in wax paper. There was also a piece of yellowed paper with instructions written in Old Mary's spidery handwriting. I read it 3 times, my heart pounding harder with each word. Step 1, at midnight, go to the cemetery. Take soil from a fresh grave. Step 2, go to the land you wish to curse. Dig a small hole. Step 3, place a twisted root in the hole. This binds his fate to the land. Step 4, add the grave soil. This brings death while he still lives. Step 5, place a piece of his clothing in the hole. This ensures the curse finds him. Step 6, add the crow's feather. This blinds him to the truth. Step 7, scatter blackthorn seeds. These bring pain to his body. Step 8, smear the black resin over everything. This weighs down his spirit. Step 9, wrap everything in spiderweb. This traps him. Step 10, prick your finger and let your blood fall 3 times. This seals the curse with your will. Step 11, set it on fire and speak these words 3 times. As this root rots, so shall he rot. As this earth decays, so shall his body decay. As this web tangles, so shall his fate tangle. What I bury here, I bury in him. Let him wither. Let him suffer. Let him fall. Step 12, when the fire dies, shape the ashes into a figure. Bury it deep. I sat there for a long time, staring at those instructions. This was dark magic. Real, dangerous, irreversible magic. If I did this, there was no going back. No forgiveness. No redemption. But Richard had already crossed every line. He'd stolen my life, abandoned his children, and destroyed everything I'd worked for. If anyone deserved this, it was him. I waited until midnight. When the clock struck 12, I wrapped myself in a black coat and slipped out of the house. The night was cold and moonless. The streets were empty. I walked quickly, my heart hammering, clutching a small jar in one hand. The cemetery was at the edge of town, surrounded by a low stone wall. I pushed open the rusted gate and stepped inside. Tombstones rose from the ground like broken teeth. The air smelled like wet earth and decay. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. I found what I was looking for near the back, a fresh grave. The earth was still dark and loose, not yet settled. A woman had died just a few days ago, someone I didn't know. I whispered an apology to her spirit and knelt down. With trembling hands, I scooped damp soil into my jar. It was cold and heavy, clinging to my fingers like it didn't want to let go. As I stood up, I heard something behind me. Footsteps. I spun around, my heart hammering. There was nothing there. Just darkness and wind. But I could have sworn I heard someone speak. The voice had sounded like Richard, weak, confused, afraid. "You're losing your mind," I told myself. "Get out of here." I grabbed my things and ran. I ran through the field, stumbled over roots and rocks, nearly fell twice. Behind me, I swear I could hear footsteps following me. Heavy, dragging footsteps. I didn't look back. By the time I reached my house, I was gasping for air, my clothes covered in dirt, my hands black with ash and soil. I locked every door, checked every window twice. Then I collapsed on the couch, shaking uncontrollably. What had I just done? I sat there in the dark for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan of the house. Part of me expected Richard to burst through the door at any moment, screaming at me, accusing me. But he didn't. Eventually, exhaustion won. I fell into a fitful sleep right there on the couch, still covered in dirt and ash. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the windows. For a moment, I thought maybe it had all been a nightmare. Maybe I'd dreamed the whole thing. Then I looked down at my hands. Dirt was still caked under my fingernails. Ash stained my palms. My clothes reeked of smoke and earth. It had been real. I dragged myself to the bathroom and scrubbed my hands until they were raw. I washed my face, changed my clothes, tried to make myself look normal. But when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes looked hollow. Haunted. What have I done? Days passed. Then a week. I heard nothing from Richard. No phone calls. No angry visits. Nothing. People in town started talking. Apparently, Richard had been seen around the city, but he looked different. Thinner. Paler. One person said he'd been coughing a lot. Another said he looked sick. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he'd caught the flu. Maybe he was working too hard, partying too much. But deep down, I knew the truth. The curse was working. 2 weeks after the ritual, I was at the general store when I ran into Mayor Thompson. "Helen," he said, looking concerned. "Have you heard from Richard lately?" "No," I said, my stomach twisting. "Why?" "I saw him yesterday," the mayor said, lowering his voice. "He looked awful. Really awful. Like he'd lost 20 pounds overnight. And he was coughing up a storm. I asked if he was okay, and he just stared at me like he didn't even recognize me." "Maybe he's sick," I said weakly. "Maybe," the mayor agreed. "But Helen, he looked scared. I've never seen Richard scared of anything in his life." I left the store feeling sick myself. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I kept thinking about Richard. About what was happening to him. About what I'd done. He deserves it, I told myself. He destroyed our lives. He abandoned his children. He hit me. But another voice whispered back, "You cursed him. You're killing him." I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to push the thoughts away. 3 weeks after the ritual, the nightmare began. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving in the house. At first, I thought it was the wind. Then I heard it again, a slow, dragging sound. Like something being pulled across the floor. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside my bed and crept out of the bedroom. The hallway was dark. I flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. The power was out. Great. I made my way down the hall toward the living room, holding the bat in front of me. The dragging sound was getting louder. When I reached the living room, I froze. Someone was sitting on the couch. A dark figure, hunched over, completely still. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The figure slowly turned its head toward me. And I saw Richard's face. But it wasn't the Richard the first knew. This Richard was a skeleton wrapped in skin. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes hollow and bloodshot. His skin was gray, almost translucent. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He tried to speak, but when he opened his mouth, thick black liquid poured out instead of words. It dripped down his chin and onto his shirt, pooling on the floor. I screamed and stumbled backward. Richard reached out toward me with one bony hand, his fingers trembling. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out and he collapsed onto the floor. Then he started crawling toward me. "What did you do?" he rasped, the black liquid still pouring from his mouth. "What did you do to me?" I turned and ran. I burst out the front door and ran into the street, screaming for help. Lights flickered on in neighboring houses. People came outside in their pajamas, confused and alarmed. "Helen! What's wrong?" someone shouted. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't explain. I just stood there, shaking and crying. When I finally looked back at my house, the front door was still open. But there was no sign of Richard. Diane, the mayor's wife, ran up to me and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. "Helen, honey, what happened?" "He was there," I whispered. "Richard was in my house. He was rotting." Diane exchanged worried glances with the other neighbors. "Helen," she said gently, "Richard's been in the city for weeks. He hasn't been here." "No," I insisted. "I saw him. He was in my living room. He was." But when the neighbors went inside to check, they found nothing. No Richard. No black liquid on the floor. Nothing out of place. They thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. Diane insisted I stay at her house that night. I didn't have the strength to argue. The next morning, Diane sat me down at her kitchen table and made me tea. "Helen," she said carefully, "I know you've been through a lot. Maybe you should talk to someone. A therapist, maybe. Someone who can help you process everything that's happened with Richard." "I'm not crazy," I said quietly. "I didn't say you were crazy. I just think." A knock at the door interrupted her. Diane went to answer it. I heard voices, then footsteps. A moment later, Diane returned, her face pale. "Helen, there's someone here to see you." My blood ran cold. "Who?" It's Richard." I stood up so fast my chair fell over. "That's impossible. But when I looked out the window, I saw him. Richard was standing in the driveway, leaning heavily on a cane. He looked even worse than he had in my nightmare, if it had been a nightmare. His face was gaunt, his clothes hung off his skeletal frame, and he was hunched over like an old man. Diane opened the door, and Richard shuffled inside. Up close, he looked like a corpse. His skin was yellow and waxy. His eyes were sunken deep into his skull. He smelled like death, like rot and decay. "Helen," he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you." Diane looked like she wanted to run. I'll give you two some privacy." She practically fled the room. Richard and I stood there, staring at each other. "What do you want?" I finally asked. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. When he pulled it away, it was stained black. "I'm dying," he said simply. "Good." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "Helen, please. I know I hurt you. I know I was awful. But something's wrong. Something's really wrong. I've been to 5 doctors. They can't figure out what's happening to me. I'm rotting from the inside out. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I can barely breathe." "You brought this on yourself," I said coldly. "Did I?" He looked at me with those hollow eyes. "Or did you do something, Helen? Did you curse me?" My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" "I know you went to Blackwood Hollow," he said. "I know you saw that witch. And ever since then, I've been dying. So tell me the truth, what did you do to me?" I could have denied it. I could have lied, gaslit him, made him think he was losing his mind. But I was so tired of lying. "I did what I had to do," I said. "You took everything from me. You betrayed me, humiliated me, abandoned our children. You hit me, Richard. You hit me. So yes, I cursed you. And I don't regret it." For a moment, Richard just stared at me in shock. Then his face crumpled. "Please," he begged, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. "Please, Helen. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just make it stop. I'll give you everything, the house, the farm, all the money. Just make it stop." "I can't," I said. And it was true. Old Mary had never told me how to reverse a curse. Maybe it couldn't be reversed. "Then I'm going to die," Richard whispered. "Yes," I said. "You are." He broke down sobbing, but I felt nothing. No pity. No remorse. Just cold, hard satisfaction. Richard tried everything. He went to more doctors. He tried experimental treatments. He even went to a priest and begged for an exorcism. Nothing worked. The curse had its claws in him, and it wasn't letting go. He moved back to town, too weak to stay in the city. Sarah, his mistress, had abandoned him the moment he got sick. She wanted nothing to do with a dying man. He tried to come home, but I wouldn't let him in. "You made your choice," I told him through the locked door. "You wanted a new life. Well, this is it." He slept in his car for a few nights, then checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town. My children heard he was back, and they came to visit. When they saw what he'd become, they were horrified. "What happened to him?" my daughter whispered, tears in her eyes. "Karma," I said simply. My oldest son wanted to take Richard to a specialist, but Richard refused. He knew it wouldn't help. He knew he was cursed. He spent his final days alone in that motel room, wasting away, coughing up black bile, begging forgiveness from a God who apparently wasn't listening. And then, one morning, the motel owner found him dead in his bed. The official cause of death was listed as complications from an unknown illness. But I knew the truth. Richard had rotted to death. Just like the curse promised. We buried Richard on a cold October morning. It was a small funeral. Just me, the kids, a few distant relatives, and Mayor Thompson. No one else bothered to come. Richard had burned too many bridges. The pastor gave a generic eulogy about forgiveness and eternal rest, but I barely listened. I stood at the grave, staring at the casket, feeling nothing. No grief. No guilt. No relief. Just emptiness. After the service, my children hugged me and told me they were sorry for my loss. But they didn't know the whole truth. They didn't know what I'd done. And I'd never tell them. Richard was buried in the same cemetery where I'd stolen soil for the curse. There was a certain poetic justice in that. As the workers lowered the casket into the ground, I whispered under my breath. As this root rots, so shall he rot. And then I walked away. After Richard's death, everything changed. His will left everything to me, the house, the farm, all the properties, all the money. Apparently, he'd never gotten around to changing it after he met Sarah. Suddenly, I was wealthy. I sold most of the properties and split the money between my children. They each got enough to buy houses, pay off debts, start businesses. They finally got the help their father should have given them when he was alive. They were grateful. They were happy. They moved on with their lives. And I stayed in the old house, alone, tending my garden. People in town treated me differently after Richard died. Some pitied me, the poor widow. Others whispered that I'd somehow caused his death, though they could never prove anything. Diane never spoke to me again. I think she suspected something. Maybe she remembered our trip to Blackwood Hollow. Maybe she put the pieces together. But she never said a word. Years passed. My children thrived. They had families, careers, good lives. I became a grandmother several times over. I should have been happy. But I wasn't. Because Richard never really left. At first, it was small things. Doors opening by themselves. Cold spots in the house. The smell of cigarettes and cologne, Richard's smell, appearing out of nowhere. I told myself it was just my imagination. Old houses make noises. Smells linger. But then I started seeing him. It happened on a cold winter night, about 2 years after his death. I was sleeping when I woke up to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. Tap. 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 I sat up in bed, my heart racing. The tapping continued. Insistent. Rhythmic. Tap. 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 I got out of bed and walked slowly toward the window. My hands shook as I pulled back the curtain. Richard was standing outside. Or what was left of him. His skin was gray and rotting. His eyes were milky white, clouded over. His mouth hung open, and that thick black liquid dripped from his lips. He stared at me through the glass, his dead eyes boring into mine. Then he spoke. His voice was muffled by the window, but I heard it clearly. But he came back. Again. And again. And again. Sometimes I'd see him standing in the corner of my bedroom, watching me while I slept. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of him in mirrors, there 1 second, gone the next. Sometimes I'd hear his voice whispering from the walls. What did you do? What did you do? What did you do? I tried ignoring him. I tried blessing the house. I tried moving to a different bedroom. Nothing worked. The curse hadn't just killed Richard. It had bound him to this place. Bound him to me. And now I was paying the price. What did you do to me? I screamed and stumbled backward. When I looked again, he was gone. One night, after another sleepless night of hauntings, I broke down. I sat at the kitchen table, crying, and screamed at the empty room. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I cursed you. I was angry. I was desperate. You destroyed my life. What did you expect me to do? Silence. Then, slowly, Richard appeared in the doorway. He looked different this time. Less rotted. Almost sad. He walked toward me, his footsteps making no sound. You killed me, Helen, he said quietly. You killed yourself, I shot back. You chose greed over family. You chose another woman over your wife. You chose cruelty over kindness. I just made sure you faced consequences. Consequences, Richard repeated bitterly. Is that what you call this? Eternal suffering? What do you want from me? I whispered. He stared at me for a long moment. I want you to live with what you've done, he said. Just like I have to live with what I did. And then he disappeared. That was 5 years ago. Richard still visits me. Not as often, but he's still here. I don't think he'll ever truly leave. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just walked away, let him have his new life, and moved on with mine. But then I remember the slap. The humiliation. The way he threw away 30 years of marriage like it meant nothing. And I realize I don't regret what I did. Not even a little. My children have good lives now. They own homes. They're happy. They've forgiven their father, or at least made peace with his memory. They don't know the truth. They never will. I live alone in this house, with my garden and my ghosts. I'm not happy, but I'm not miserable either. I exist. I endure. And sometimes, late at night when Richard appears at my window or whispers from the shadows, I pull back the curtain and look him in the eye. And I say the same thing every time. I didn't do this to you, Richard. You did this to yourself. Then I close the curtain, go back to bed, and sleep like a baby. So that's my story, everyone. That's what happened when I finally stood up for myself. When I finally said, enough. Was it worth it? That's for you to decide. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below and let me know, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have walked away? Or would you have done exactly what I did? See you in the next video. Stay safe out there. And remember, be careful who you betray. You never know what they're capable of. But there was no one there. Just rows of silent graves and the wind moving through the trees. You're imagining things, I told myself. Keep moving. I hurried out of the cemetery and headed toward the farm. The farm, my farm, sat on the outskirts of town, dark and empty. The crops I'd planted months ago had withered from neglect. Richard hadn't bothered to maintain it. He was just going to sell it and let someone else deal with it. I walked into the middle of the field, far from the road where no one could see me. I knelt down and started digging with my bare hands. The soil was cold and damp, and it clung to my skin like it was alive. I dug until the hole was about a foot deep. Then I unwrapped the bundle old Mary had given me. First, I placed the twisted root in the hole. It looked almost like a tiny, gnarled human figure. I pressed it down firmly. This binds his fate to the land. Next, I poured the cemetery soil over it. This brings death while he still lives. I pulled a piece of Richard's shirt from my pocket, a sleeve I'd cut off one of his dirty shirts he'd left behind. I laid it over the soil. This ensures the curse finds him. Then I added the crow's feather, the blackthorn seeds, and smeared the sticky black resin over everything. Finally, I draped the fragile spiderweb over the top, wrapping it all together. This traps him. Now came the hardest part. I pulled a sewing needle from my pocket and pricked my finger. Blood welled up, dark and thick. I held my hand over the hole and let 3 drops fall. This seals the curse with my will. I lit a match and dropped it into the hole. The herbs and resin caught fire immediately, crackling and hissing. Black smoke rose into the night sky, thick and oily. The smell was awful, like burning hair and rotten eggs. I started chanting the words Old Mary had written, my voice shaking at first, then growing stronger. As this root rots, so shall he rot. As this earth decays, so shall his body decay. As this web tangles, so shall his fate tangle. What I bury here, I bury in him. Let him wither. Let him suffer. Let him fall. I repeated the words 3 times, my voice rising with each repetition. As I spoke, the fire grew hotter, brighter. The smoke twisted and writhed like it was alive. The air around me felt heavy, oppressive, like something was pressing down on my chest. Then, suddenly, the fire went out. The field plunged into darkness. And that's when I felt it. A presence. Something watching me. Something around me. The air grew colder. My breath came out in white puffs. The wind stopped. Everything went silent, no crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing. I looked down at the ashes in the hole. They were still warm, glowing faintly. With shaking hands, I reached down and started molding them into a shape. A figure. A person. The ashes were sticky and warm, like clay. I shaped them into a crude human form, head, torso, arms, legs. I made it hunched and twisted, bent with pain. Let him wither, I whispered. Let him suffer. Let him fall. I buried the figure deep in the hole and covered it with dirt, patting it down firmly. It was done. As I stood up, the wind suddenly picked up again, howling through the field. The trees around me creaked and groaned. And then I heard it. A voice. Faint. Distant. But unmistakable. What did you do? I spun around, my heart